Good afternoon, and thanks for joining the Ambition Insolvency and Restructuring Trends webinar for H2 2022. I'm hosted by myself, Chris Stark. I head up the advisory team here at Ambition, focusing on insolvency and restructuring recruitment, and I'm joined by my colleague Harman.
Hi guys.
Without any further ado, let's go into the plan for the day. So you might remember actually receiving an email asking you to fill out our survey. So thanks very much for people that did fill those out. It's really, really helpful. Today we'll be going through actually the results of that survey. We'll also be giving out some advice for job seekers, and some recommendations for hiring managers, and an area that is obviously very much of importance to people at the moment, and always an area that people want to know about is around salaries. And we'll also be doing a Q&A session as well. In terms of the survey and who we surveyed, so we send it out to a multitude of different people at different levels in the insolvency and restructuring market, whether that be people at trainee level all the way up to partner level. So we feel like it gives a pretty broad idea and overview of what's going on in the market. So yeah, that's the plan for the day, and we'll get started there.
So predictions for H2. So when we asked hiring managers if they thought they were going to be busier in the second half of this year compared to H1, these were the results. So 91% said yes, which to me looks like a pretty resounding yes, which is I'm not going to say it's surprising to see, but certainly when you compare it with previous sort of halves and previous quarters, it's very, very different to what we used to see. So whereas before, if we asked an IP or a hiring manager if they thought they were going to get busier, even the sort of next month or next quarter, that they really had no idea, I think, and so did neither did we. It's very, very mixed. They weren't sure what was going to happen, but this time around, it's more or less a resounding yes. So I think this is in no small part due to the economic conditions that we find ourselves in, inflation, wider stuff happening in the political climate. I think particularly. I don't know if you've seen any different, Chris, but I think particularly retail I've seen out there quite a bit, and the construction sector as well, I think is driving quite a bit of that, and naturally that has an impact on recruitment demand as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think retail is always an area that I would highlight as being potentially at risk. I think even prior to COVID, there was quite a lot of changes in the retail market anyway that was putting pressure on certain brands. I think people buying online more has definitely affected that, and then obviously less footfall over the last couple of years has obviously had an impact. So yeah, I think it's pretty fair to say that's an area that we're going to see again be under pressure over the next couple of years, especially with people have to tighten their belts with the price of living going up as well. It's natural that people will spend less on retail items.
So predictions for the second half with regards to hiring. So I sort of briefly mentioned this on the last slide, but here's the stats for this. 59%, which is well over half of employers are looking to make new hires in the second half of this year. We didn't survey this, but I would imagine that a percentage of those people have already hired this year, and are now looking for additional hires or to backfill roles from movement from employees that they've seen. So yeah, I think it's definitely a busy market at the moment. I think me and Chris are getting more or less sort of every other day a call or a message about a new hire that an employer is looking to make all across the UK and sometimes internationally as well. I've been here for just over 3 years recruiting into insolvency and restructuring, and I've never seen a market this busy from the demand side. I don't know if you think any different, Chris.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. We're at that point where the supply and demand is definitely not in line. It never really has been since I've done the job. There's always been not enough candidates to do the job. But I think now, I say, as people are getting more and more busy, it's natural that say the need to hiring would go up. And I think also that's a bounce back from 2020, when hiring certainly for about 3 to 6 months pretty much ground to a halt at most levels and in most firms. And I think even 2021 it was pretty slow, and even for the first quarter of this year it wasn't super busy. It was slowly gearing up, and now I think we're into that mode of everyone is everyone is at least open to bringing on someone, whether it's a desperate need or it's we're expected to be busier later this year. So we'd take a look at somebody.
So this sort of goes on quite nicely to levels in demand. What hires at what levels people are most in need of. So quite interesting results this half, because on our last webinar that we did in March, it was senior admins that were the most in demand. And now there's been a bit of a transition away from that. So now what people are most in need of is administrators between 1 to 2 years experience at 36%. And then just after that, we've still got senior admins. So, make no mistake, senior admins are still in high demand. It's just they've been overtaken this half by admins, which is quite a very, very difficult part of the market to recruit for, particularly at the more experienced then. So admins with 2 years experience, if we, rewind 2 years, companies weren't really hiring people with no experience at that time. Part of that was due to working entirely remotely and not really having the confidence to bring on trainees. And then I guess that sort of shows that the increase in trainee recruitment now. I guess now we're all in the office more often, on a hybrid working model. People have a lot more confidence to bring on new trainees, and we need to as well, particularly because it's so difficult to get people with experience. It can be easy just to hire a graduate or a school leaver. So yeah, 14% is trainees now. Obviously we can see that assistant managers and managers are at 9%, and then senior manager / associate director at 5%, which isn't unusual to see. Demand is always lower at those levels because there are just fewer people there. The candidate pool is a lot smaller, and there tends to be a lot less movement as well.
Yeah, I'd echo all that. Yes, senior level hires. I think a lot of teams are probably looking around and seeing that maybe if they're anything a little bit top heavy, so there's not a massive drive to bring on more managers or more senior levels. There'll always be a need for appointment takers, which we'll probably touch on a bit later. But yeah, mirror everything that you said there, mate. So yeah, we asked around appraisals and salary reviews. So the first question we asked was around, have you had an appraisal? So has someone actually sat down with you and talked to you about your career and how it's going? And we find it quite surprising the actual numbers here. We're seeing 1 in 5 people almost that haven't had an appraisal at all. And then we also asked around salary increases as well. So not just a review, has it actually gone up? And again, it's similar numbers really, where we're seeing almost 1 in 5 people here haven't had an increase in their salary and haven't had a appraisal in the last year. That for us is kind of a bit of a red flag. I think at the bare minimum, an appraisal is needed at least once a year. It's not uncommon to have them at least every 6 months as well. Ultimately, if you're an ambitious individual and you want to progress your career, if you're not being told, it is going well, that's great. But if you're not hitting all your targets, then you really need to know why that is. And again, with the price of everything going up at the moment, with inflation being at who really knows what percentage, it depends who I speak to. Some people saying 5, some people saying it's 10. Either way, it's definitely there. I think that's everyone can see that. Price of petrol, price of food, price of electricity, it's all going up. In real terms, if you've not had at least some increase in your salary in the last year, it's pretty obvious that effectively your take-home pay has effectively gone down. Your money's going, it's covering less distance. So I think we're seeing that as a bare minimum. And there are firms out there that we know of that have sort of taken the action to offer pay rises across the board just to keep up with inflation. And then they're still doing individual pay increases based on performance. So again, if you're one of those, one of that 20% or one of those 18% of people that are sort of sitting there going, well, that's not happened to me. Maybe that's just the way the market's going. I think our message is that isn't the norm. That is the exception, really. And I think you're in a good position to at least be asking for, if I've not had a pay increase, why? And if I've not been promoted and you're expected to be, then why has that happened? There may be a valid reason, there may not be. But if you don't have that appraisal, it's pretty hard to move forward, really. Following on from salaries, we added a new question that we didn't do last time around, which is around bonuses. So we asked around what percentage of people have actually received a bonus. Pretty interesting how evenly split down the middle this was. So I think a lot of people may not even know that bonuses are something you get in, the insolvency restructuring market is typically not an industry that's associated with high bonuses. It's not something like M&A where you'd always definitely expect bonuses to be quite a high factor, quite a high percentage of your actual total package as your bonus. And then we also asked, if you did have a bonus, what percentage of bonus did you get? So the people that did get a bonus, we're seeing that 1 in 3 of those people that get a bonus are getting a bonus over 10%, which is not a small amount of cash to be getting every year. So I think there's what we can see here from ranging from people that are taking a home over 20% as a bonus, which is it's not a small percentage of people there. It's actually quite a large percentage of people taking home pretty sizable bonuses, all the way down to that that 57% of people responded that didn't get any bonus at all. That is quite a huge discrepancy, I think. And again, I think it's something that is worth asking. If you're one of the people that's considering and making a move this year, I think it's something to be asking in interviews. You might not get loads of clarity on exactly how much that bonus is. Ultimately, it's going to vary from year to year. But even if it's asking just that it exists, it is something certainly to ask. Harman, I've caught you while you're about to talk. I'll time that terribly. Harman, I know you've had more candidates certainly asking around bonuses this year.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is welcome bonuses actually. So I guess that is kind of linked to this. I mean, it's not like a salaried bonus, but it's a bonus that you get if you join a company, which is still quite rare to see. But I think particularly for companies that are super, super keen on an individual candidate for whatever reason, they will offer welcome bonuses, and those are in the thousands as well, which is quite rare. I don't want to set people's expectations too high with that, or to expect that at all, really. But it's just like a nice sort of additional financial incentive to join that company. And I think it's from the hiring manager side, it's a way to differentiate yourself between their other offers. If you're offering a senior admin 45 grand and they've got 4 identical offers, very, very similar firms, most likely, you've got to think about a way to differentiate yourself and make yourself more attractive to that candidate. So welcome bonuses are more common now than I used to see before.
Yeah. Qualifications pretty apt at the moment, I think, Harman.
Yeah. I mean, CPI results came out today at some stage. I've been seeing a lot of posts on LinkedIn about this. So we're going to talk about that in a second. But before we do that, accounting qualifications. So when we asked employers when they're hiring which accounting qualification is more valuable to them, or which one do they value more, it's interesting actually. The AAT was so high at 18%. Clearly, AAT isn't as advanced as ACCA or ACA. A lot of A's there.
Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah, but I think that's got to be linked to the increase in trainee hiring. I think I would imagine that's probably why that is. Between ACCA and ACA, a bit of a difference, not too much. I guess it really depends what side of the market you're going into, whether it's restructuring or whether it's just standard formal insolvency, and also what kind of company you're joining. So if you're joining, I mean, I can't name any names on this call, but let's say, for example, you're halfway through an ACA and you want to carry that on in a company, they would obviously prefer you to be on ACA and not ACCA, and vice versa. So yeah, I think take those results with a pinch of salt. And then now we're going to go over CPI, CII, and which qualification people value more. So majority of people don't think there's much of a difference, but if they do think there's a difference, they would prefer CPI over CII. Very small percentage of people would prefer CII. I'd imagine that's linked to the way that you sit these examinations. So with CPI, I believe you sit in June and November, and then results come out a couple of months afterwards. Whereas with CII, it's a lot more flexible, which I think is a positive, to be fair. If you fail it, you can just resit it pretty much instantaneously. Whereas with CPI, you've got to wait another 6 months. So I would say that some employers would see CPI as more valuable because it's either taking you longer to get there, or if you've passed it, there's probably been a bit more pressure on you on the day to actually do it. But I would sort of caveat all that with, listen, if you're doing this CII, there's no need to worry that I'm on the wrong qualification or anything like that. I think the vast majority of employers that I speak to, if I mention that someone's CII qualified, I actually don't think I've actually ever had anyone react negatively to that, or if they've had CPR and a job specification and the candidate's CII qualified, but they view that as an issue at all. I think it's important to stress that this is when asked. So an employer's being pushed for an answer here. Usually I don't think they really give it much of a thought.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think no one is passionately sitting there thinking, if it's the wrong exam board. I mean, that's effectively what we're talking about here. It's a different exam board. I say maybe the structure of the way the exams are done is slightly different, but it's the same level of expertise ultimately. And most employers really aren't that bothered. It's probably just because we put this question here for them. So that's on qualification. Again, congratulations to everyone that's passed their CPI today. And if you've not passed, it really isn't the end of the world. I think that's key to mention. It's not something where we've ever seen that necessarily work against someone that's maybe applied, that's maybe passed on their second attempt or even their third attempt. It's not held against you. So if you're one of those people that's unfortunately missed out, just missed out today, please don't be disheartened and think that I've really messed up. It's not the end of the world at all. I've failed enough exams in my life to know it really isn't the end of the world to fail one. Cool. So the Great Resignation. It's a phrase you might have seen sort of banded around on LinkedIn a lot over this year. I think that our survey results show that that phenomenon is probably it's the same in our market, same as it is in every other market. So we asked you how likely is it that you will change jobs the second half of this year. So that's a very specific amount of time. And the result was 65% said that it's likely they will change jobs. Now, obviously, you've got to take this with a fairly large grain of salt. Just because someone says to us that they're likely to change jobs doesn't mean they're going to. People say that to us all the time, and then never moving. That's absolutely fine, but it happens all the time. People might just have had a bad day when we've sent them this survey, and they think, I'm jacking it all in, and actually a week later they're absolutely fine. But 65% is still quite a high number to say that they're likely to change jobs. And also, if we factor in as well, we asked how many people have actually interviewed in the last 12 months. And again, we've got a third of people that have at least interviewed somewhere. Again, what percentage of these people actually ended up moving? Certainly won't be 100% of those people actually ended up moving jobs, but it's fair to say probably a lot of them would have done. The way the labour market is, if you're out there, if you're actively interviewing at more than one place, you've got a good chance of probably securing an offer, and it's really the ball's in your court as to whether you decide to move. As to why people are sort of feeling like this at the moment, there's probably a few different reasons. I think post-COVID, a few people have sort of wondered what they want to do with their careers, what they want to do with their lives. Do they want to work in insolvency and restructuring anymore? It's not uncommon for people to decide, they've done it for 3 years and just want to try something else. The change in hybrid working, so that's become more of a norm now. I think some people that have got really used to working 5 days a week, and now they have to come back into the office. They may now be seeking new employment somewhere else where they can continue doing that. They've got used to it. They've got pets, or they've just a circumstance change in their life and mean that they really value it. And ultimately, once you've got used to doing something, it's actually quite hard to go back. I know I found it actually a bit weird having to go into the office 3-4 times a week. Got quite used to working from my living room really. And also the increased price of living. Again, we'll mention it a few times through this webinar. I think the reason we'll mention it is because it is so much a key issue at the moment in greater society. But the fact that everything's going up is putting more pressure on people's wages. Being underpaid by 2,000 or 3,000 when everything's going fine in the world is maybe not ideal, but you can maybe get by with it. When the price of your electricity and your petrol is all going up, that extra bit of cash actually would be really, really useful, and that really does put pressure on people. Like, do I actually need to make a move here? And can I get myself a better salary because I can really do with that extra cash? So that's something to bear in mind for anyone that is looking to hire. There's definitely people out there, and also about staff retention, that you've got to work hard to keep your people. Good quality staff will be able to go out to the market and find something else, definitely. So on people that are looking to make a move, we ask this every time. What is the most important factor for job seekers when looking to make a move? It's no surprise to us that salary is the most important factor. Basically, down to the points I've just mentioned there, it typically is. To be honest, salary is almost always, if there is one factor, it's probably the biggest one. We went through a period, I think, last year, maybe the year before, where flexible working was the real topic of interest, and people really valued having that flexibility. I think as that's become more and more normalized, and now it's kind of every firm really offers flexible working. Maybe of our clients, maybe like genuinely is probably a handful that don't offer some form of structured hybrid working. The importance of it drops off. It becomes more of a standard benefit rather than a perk. I think a key point to note on this particular graph is that it's actually, there's no one, even though salary is the biggest factor, it's still fairly even across the board. And the smallest chunk of that pie is company culture, but it's still at 17%, which is a decent size. And I'd say this is fairly representative of your typical job seeker, to be honest, in that most people are affected by numerous different factors. We've got 4 here, but there's most people are probably in fact impacted by 10 or even more different factors that are all having small little impacts. So while salary is important, I think if you are a hiring manager, you've got to be able to offer pretty much all of these. Flexible working, that's a standard. A good salary. Career progression, what does that actually mean for somebody? And again, most people will say in an interview they offer career progression, but actually to be able to display it and give examples of how you do that, that's a bit more difficult. And again, company culture, have an actual identity of what your company culture is, and find a way of actually displaying that to anyone that's interviewing. I don't know if you had any bits add on that particular section.
Not particularly. I think you summed up quite well that most people, for most people, it's going to be a mix of all that kind of stuff. It's interesting to see salaries overtaken flexibility, but as you said, that's because flexibility is more the norm now. And then that salary probably is, again, to mention it, probably due to the cost of living.
Cool. Moving on to flexible working.
Yeah. So the 4-day work week. I think prior to even the past year or so, even during the pandemic, I viewed the 4-day work week as something it was almost a bit novel. It was a bit abstract. Never ever thought that I'd ever be working on, a role that could offer a 4-day work week. And what I'm talking about here is a 4-day work week for which you're on full pay. So not working part-time 4 days and then your salary is prorated. This is a full-time position. You just do your hours from Monday to Thursday, usually a little bit extended. So these are our sort of employers and employees' thoughts on that. So not unexpected, to be fair, but you can see that the majority of employees are strongly for it or somewhat for it, and employers are mostly either against it or they're not really sure. So you can see employees 53% strongly for, and only 5% of employers that are strongly for. So I think that probably the most interesting stat on here is the employers section, that are neither for or against, 43%. So almost half of employers don't really know. They're not for it or against it. I would imagine that there is a section of those people that are probably open to it, but they just don't really know what it looks like. And they, I only really know of one company on the market within insolvency and restructuring that offers a 4-day work week. I know that the 4-day work week was trialed in, I think, Finland, Norway, or somewhere in the Nordics a little while ago, and now that's been brought to the UK. So this company trialed it for 6 months, and now they're going to implement it permanently, I believe, and the feedback from them has been really good. Doesn't seem as if there's been any impact on productivity. It's only really had positive benefits for them as a company. I can't really comment on retention, to be fair, but I would imagine people are really, really enjoying it. Anyone that we've placed there really is enjoying it. It's quite life-changing, actually, to have a 3-day weekend, especially after the 3-day weekend we've just had. You can imagine what that'd be like, having that all year round. And I think also it's done wonders for their candidate attraction. So I mentioned that we'd place people there. One of the main reasons those people actually applied to that position through us is because of that 4-day work week and the flexibility that they provide. And in some instances, I've actually had candidates just hear about this on the market through peers or other recruiters and sort of directly reach out to me to sort of say, like, who is that company? And if anyone's wondering on the call now, I can't name them here. But if you want to contact either of us directly, I can let you know about that opportunity, and they are actually hiring at the moment. But yeah, it's quite a new concept, and I think it's probably worthwhile employers at least having a think about it. It's not going to work for everyone, and it's not going to work for all positions. But I think at least just to put that on employers' radars is important to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll definitely echo that effort around it's worth trialing it. If you look at the employees' results and you see what percentage of people are actually against it, we're talking less than 10%. So the chances of actually really upsetting any member of staff, if you trial it for 3 months, is probably quite low. But the chance, the reward is likely to be quite high. You're probably going to, really make a lot of people a lot happier. Your staff retention, I would imagine, is going to improve. If you're struggling to hire, particularly if you're in maybe a difficult to hire location, maybe where there's not a lot of candidates in the market, you've got a way of attracting them. Even if you're in a market where there's loads of candidates, you've still got the issue of there's lots more competition. That can be a genuine USP, and that's hard to find in this market. Something you can know your master to and say that's actually something we offer that nobody else does, or that very, very few people do. Much like hybrid working, has become a standard. I don't know whether 4-day working weeks are going to become a standard. I think that's probably a stretch, but I think it will be something we see more and more and more. And I think the early adopters will definitely get the biggest benefits in terms of the hiring practices. They will be the people that will be able to poach staff quite easily. They'll keep hold of their own people. There's obviously going to be some people that really do prefer a 5-day working week, but I think that's going to be I think from what we've seen, that's probably quite a small percentage of people realistically. So yeah, we've mentioned around CPI exams. So again, well done to those people. JIB stuff, that's a few months. We're still a few months away. So best of anyone that's studying for that. Maybe you're actually taking a bit of break from practicing, revising right now. This is maybe a bit of respite. So we asked the question of, would you like to sit the JIB exams in the future? There's a general lack of new IPs entering the market. I'm working with a few different firms that are in that position where they're maybe looking at succession planning. They've got partners that are maybe looking to step away in the next couple of years, and they're looking around and they can't necessarily see an obvious person that would take on that that list of contacts and keep the business going. So the market is crying out for people to sort of be newly qualified, that want to take on appointments, want to be the future directors and partners. I think a key bit to note here is actually if we remove people that have already passed their joint board and just count those people, we're left with 36% of people that said they didn't want to sit the exams in the future. I think that's quite a worrying stat, I think, for the market in general and for the industry, that there's actually that many people that have no intention or don't want to. Could be a multitude of reasons. Maybe they've just, they're quite happy doing the role they're doing at the moment. They might have got to a certain level and, for family commitments, they don't want to, spend the time doing it. Or I think the worry is that maybe there's people that are actually, still quite early on in their career, but they just don't see the attraction of actually pursuing it as a career. Maybe they're looking to make a move into something else. So I think there's a lot of work to be done with those more junior level candidates to encourage them to, sit the CPI earlier. Get those people on a progression path, be in mentorship schemes. There's a few firms we work with, again, that they have their partners, not cherry picking, but genuinely offering mentorship for those more junior level people, the people that have got the ability, clearly got a lot of aptitude, and they could see them maybe in 5 years' time or even less, being able to sit and pass the joint board exams. Putting an arm around them and actually explaining what does that career path look like, what are the perks, what are the benefits, also what the drawbacks are. And there's no job that's perfect. Everything you've got to explain with warts and all, but I think there's obviously a really exciting career. I think given where the market is going at the moment, it's a great time to be entering the market. I think salaries certainly at the more junior end have never been better. We're going to go into that later, but it's a great time to be going into it. It's becoming more and more lucrative. Bonuses are getting more and more common and getting higher. So if there's anybody again that's listening that's maybe sort of on the fence and isn't really sure, there's opportunities out there, and the market is needing. It's not a saturated market, far from it, for people sort of wanting to become licensed IPs. Cool. So we'll go on to a bit of a summary of advice for job seekers. How much do you want to take it off, mate?
Yeah. So these are just the main highlights, I think, or things we've not got hours and hours to go through all of our advice for candidates, because there's so much. And feel free to submit questions on the Q&A now if you've got any questions. We'll answer it in the end. But these are the sort of the main three things. I think the first one, we've got to start off with salaries. Salaries are on the rise across the board at all different levels, all different regions. Some levels more than more. But I think if you're, on the fence about making a move, or you've not really actioned anything, in the past, but you've kind of been thinking about it, I think now is a really, really good time to be considering a move purely for a financial reason, or at the very least, you should make sure that your salary is in line with the current market rate, which changes. It changes. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly going up, and that's because demand is so high and supply is so low. So I think my key message on this would just be it's very, very easy to stay in your bubble, especially if you don't speak to specialist recruiters, if you don't have too much of a network outside of your own team or your own business. It's very, very easy to become quite blinkered and just to think, okay, well, so and so's on the same salary as me, or they're only on an extra grand or two than me. That must be the scope for the growth within my role. Sometimes it's not, and I'm always surprised when I speak to candidates that are so far below market rate in some instances, and they're not aware of it. So in some instances, I've spoken to candidates that have been senior admins on like 30k or something, or an administrator on about 20 grand, which I think in the current market is quite frankly ridiculous, to be that far below market rate. So yeah, I think you should keep your finger on the pulse of salaries, definitely. And you guys can view the salary guide at the end of this webinar, or sort of download it if you want to look at it in your own time. In terms of the second thing I'd probably advise would just be to explore your options with regards to flexible working. So you'd be very, very surprised with what you can get at the moment. So in terms of working in the office and working from home, it's fairly standard. I'm not going to sort of lecture you guys on that. I imagine probably everyone listening to this right now has some degree of hybrid working on offer. If you don't know, if you're in 5 days, know that you're in a tiny percentage of the industry at the moment that are actually doing that. And if it's starting to grind on you and you don't want to do that, you could probably know that every single option that we'd actually put forward to you would be flexible. It's very, very rare that you have to be in every day. You can also sort of be very, very flexible with regards to the hours you want to work as well. So there are some firms out there where you can choose your hours. You can have certain contactable hours, and we've placed multiple people like that recently as well. So there's a bit of something out there for everyone at the moment. So yeah, I think definitely look at flexible working options. Thirdly, if you do get yourself into an interview process, of course you want to be as well prepped as you can, and you want to give a good interview, and you want to impress them. But there's literally no point in doing that if you get to the end of the interview and you're just not really sure about the opportunity in any way. I think you should come out of an interview feeling either very, very positive about it, or, well, I don't want to say negatively about it, but maybe not so keen about it. I think what you shouldn't be coming out of an interview with is loads and loads of questions that you didn't ask. So definitely go into an interview with questions, and don't forget that in the current market, you're in demand. So don't forget that you should interview the company as well. So be clear on the factors that are important to you. So whether that's salary, progression, flexible working, whatever it is, ask them questions about it and ask them to give you examples. If you ask an employer if they offer career progression, I'll be very, very surprised if they said no. But if you ask an employer, okay, tell me about your progression on offer in the team, give me names of people in the team that have progressed, give me examples, and then after the interview you can search them up on LinkedIn and see if the proof's actually there. And I think that's a lot better way to go around interviewing. You got anything to add, Chris?
I don't think there's really much more for me to add. I think that the overriding thing is to always be open. I'm not saying you need to be applying for jobs constantly. That's pretty exhausting, and interviewing all the time. People have got a life to live. You've got a job to do ultimately. If you never actually settle down somewhere and actually just commit to a role for a couple of years at least, you'll never progress anyway. But I think, like I say, you mentioned about being in a bubble. I think there's an element of there is such a thing as being too loyal, and never to not even consider looking at other options. It can be, I think, is rarely rewarded in this industry, very, very rarely. Certainly, I think there has been research that shows that people that move more end up earning more over the course of their career. There's obviously a limit to that. You can't just move around every year just to get more money. That's you're going to get found out quite quickly doing that. An old boss of mine said you should treat it like Olympic cycle. At least every 4 years you should be looking. That's a bit of a concern because I've been here 4 years now, so my boss is going to be actually asking me what I'm thinking about. But yeah, that is a pretty simple way. Is like, again, you don't have to. That doesn't mean you have to move every 4 years, but I think you should at least be checking in with somebody that's not got a vested interest in terms of keeping you there. Recruiters, we don't always just say you should move. Genuinely, we've had loads of conversation with people where we hear what their situation is in terms of their working flexibility and the work they're doing and the progression they're on offer for. They might be on a path to be promoted. They've got a great salary. We go, actually, you're pretty well set unless there's something else you're not telling us. We probably can't offer anything better than that. And actually, maybe you probably should stay put, but keep in touch with us. So it's not a case of if you speak to a recruiter, then they're going to necessarily convince you to make a move. We're here to advise ultimately. We don't make anyone do anything really. As much as we wish we had that much influence, we're just two guys trying to give our opinion really. So yeah, in terms of that, we'll move on to advice for hiring manager. I think this is quite important given where the market's at. There is a real need to work on staff retention. We've talked about the amount of people that are looking to sort of leave the market at the moment, whether that's be to move to another firm or to just leave insolvency altogether. So think about things you can add into your benefits to help with staff retention, whether that be if you're not offering flexible working yet. I definitely think that's worth considering in some shape or form. Even if it's just flexible hours, that would be a massive help. Also considering about bonuses, can you offer something around there? Appraisals and salary increases, I think that's something that should be built into every company, at the very least every year. But again, every 6 months an appraisal, that's not a massive ask, but that could be a massive difference for a lot can happen in 6 months for an employee. They can feel very quickly like they're actually stagnating. So a lot of the moves that we see genuinely probably could have been avoided. That person probably would have stayed put if a review had been done 6 months prior or a year prior. And an honest conversation had been had. A lot of the time when people feel they need to make a move is because there's been lack of communication. And I think that is the one thing that can really be a massive way of keeping staff. And then on the hiring front, we understand that back in COVID times it was remote working. Not many people necessarily wanted to bring on completely fresh graduates and sort of just throw them in the deep end with no real sort of training. But when we're not in that world anymore, thankfully, we're now in a world where people can go into the office. We can have that human interaction. Hiring junior staff is a really cost-effective way of growing your team. Certainly if you're using recruitment, if you're spending a lot on recruitment agency fees, which is obviously great for us, but probably not great for whoever's holding the purse strings. Hiring graduates is a far more cost-effective way. The salaries are lower. You can hire multiple at the same time. And also you don't inherit any potential bad habits that someone has learned at a different firm, and someone's far more malleable to actually listen and learn and do things exactly how you want them to do. So yeah, not really in our interest to suggest that because most people don't come to us for graduate hires, but it's just genuine advice that we give to people is if you're not considered it, I think it's a very easy way to continue, and it's a way to keep the flow going and keep your team consistently growing in size without having to unsettle anyone because you're growing from the bottom and no one's getting their nose put out of joint because they were being promoted to manager and now you've just hired a new manager and that's put them back a year, and that's when you lose an assistant manager and it can very, very quickly spiral. And next thing you know, you've lost 3 people that you didn't really need to. On the human interaction side, again, prior to, I think if we went to 2019 and I suggested, do you fancy hiring someone that you've never met in person, doing it all over video? I don't think anyone would have taken me seriously. They'd have said I was mad. Now I think that's pretty common actually for hires to be done, and that the first time the candidate's actually meeting their hiring manager is in person is when they start their job. I think that's a great option. I think it makes things a little bit easier, certainly when having those maybe more passive conversation when maybe someone isn't sure if they want to move, but they are interested in seeing what's out there. Going to someone's office can feel a bit like you're really committed and you have to put a suit on or you dress smartly. That can feel like a really serious conversation. Having a video call feels a bit more relaxed. But I do think there's a lot of value in having some form of face-to-face interaction. Wherever possible. Sometimes it won't be due to timings or location. It might not be possible, but I think where you can, try and get someone in your team to meet that person face to face, either during the interview process, maybe as a final stage, or even if you've already made them the offer. Offer to that person to come and view the office. They might have already accepted the offer, but you still might want to give them a chance to come and meet them. If you've got any socials upcoming. If they've already handed the notice, and there's no harm in that person coming in and meeting the rest of the team in a non-work setting first, so that when they have their first day happens, they're not having to be introduced to everyone for the first time. It's a bit more relaxed. The chance of that person succeeding is clearly going to be better if they've actually met a few people beforehand. And then going on to, just when someone has accepted an offer, we don't consider that as the job done. We don't consider the job done actually until someone has started a new role and made it through their probation. Even then, we still keep in touch with people. But I think sometimes some of our clients, they feel like once an offer's been accepted, verbally accepted, or even a contract signed, they can feel like, oh, that's the job done, and they're definitely starting. There's a notice period. Anything can happen in a notice period, and I think definitely from a verbal offer being made and a verbal acceptance being received, that period of we've kind of agreed, we've shaken hands, but there's no actual formal paperwork. We have seen deals in the past that have fallen through and someone has stayed put or has got a different offer in that time because the contract just took too long. That shouldn't take longer in our mind than a few working days at the very, very most. We've seen the occasion where it's taken over a week, taken even 2 weeks, and it's just not a great way for someone to be bringing someone on. It doesn't look great. You've done a really slick interview process. You've told about how organized you are, how great your processes are, and then getting one document out is taking 2 weeks. It's naturally going to arise, not necessarily red flags, but certainly some amber flags where someone's going to be maybe a bit more tentative, and that means that when they hand the notice in and a counter offer comes through, which inevitably will, because everyone is doing everything they can to keep their best staff, they will get a counter offer. Those orange flags then become a bit more like red flags because they've now just had a great offer to stay put. They know that the process is there. They're used to it. They might not have met anybody in person at the new place. That creates doubt. And also the contract that took a long time to come out, maybe it's not very organized down there. All these things can start coming into play. The longer you leave it, the more chance that their current employers will have a chat with them or their friends will have a chat with them. Anything can happen. I think that's our message, is that speed of process. So having those, if it means having contracts drafted ready to go when you start a recruitment process, it should, if you've started a genuine process, you should kind of have all those bits in ready to go. HR should know that you're hiring, and it should be a slick operation. And it's a great way for someone to actually start having that nice and seamless, and you've already got it ready to go. Harman, with any of the bits you wanted to add in for hiring managers there?
I don't think so. I just think, speed is really important. So when you talk about, getting contracts out and stuff, the speed of getting those out is important. But I also think speed throughout the process. So before you even started speaking to the candidate, if you get a candidate from us, or if you get a call from us, it's probably going to be about a candidate, or it's going to be about the kind of candidates you're looking for. So know we're not just calling for the sake of it. It will always be for a reason, and that's going to be beneficial to you, not just us. And then obviously when you've got a candidate in process, as soon as you've reviewed the CV, make that time towards first stage, second stage. If there is a third stage, make it a lot shorter, or as short as you can. So just know that candidates at the moment, pursuing some of the candidates at the moment that are listening right now, probably get hammered with messages from recruiters all the time. It's our job to sort of reach out to candidates and see if we can sort of set up conversations with them. But these candidates are going to have opportunities presented to them all the time, especially if they're at the senior admin grade. So I'd say speed is definitely important. And, clients that we've worked with that are slow often miss out on the best talent because they've not moved quick enough. So I think, definitely speed is probably my particular highlight, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry to complicate things one tiny little bit. There is such a thing as too fast. I think if you've only met someone for half an hour and then you make them an offer, that can be too quick. So that's the only small caveat to that. Don't just fly off the handle and just offer someone straight away, and because that can really throw someone off. I think most people expect at least 2 interviews. One stage interview is fine, but if you do it, you make sure it's thorough. So speed, but just not too quick. That's I felt like it's been really awkward, but it's very rare that we see it, but it can happen where something's just gone a bit too fast. Right, so we'll go on to the salaries. We're not going to go through these for too long because we know we actually share these with people anyway as a separate document. But I know there's also a bit that people love to see. Harman, do you want to talk about the sort of that middle of that graph? Because I think that's an area you see increase.
So, I mean, you can see that obviously juniors have jumped up quite a bit. I mean, when I first started here, I think the junior salary for London was about 20 to 24-ish. And now 24 is actually the bottom end of that. So 24 to 26, that's definitely jumped up. You can see that even administrators without qualifications now are in London and the southeast are fetching as much as what a CPI qualified administrator used to get, and then a CPI qualified administrator is now getting what a senior admin used to get, which is pretty crazy. But these are real life figures. We base this on salaries we see in the market, placements we make, counter offers we see. So a 40k administrator that's CPI qualified might sound a bit extreme, and it is, but I know multiple people that are on that at that level. I'm talking people with like a couple of years experience, which is pretty crazy. Senior admins, again, seen a massive jump. So 40 to 45 if you're CPI qualified or CII qualified. And then 47 to around 52 for a senior admin that's an accountant. I mean, these are a range, and they're not the extremes of either end. There are definitely people on lower, there are definitely people on higher. So senior admin that's qualified probably could fetch up about to sort of mid 50s, Big Four or some of the US consultancies. So take it with a pinch of salt. If you want something a bit more accurate and something more tailored, because I guess that these regions are quite generic. I mean, obviously you've got London, but the southeast could mean quite a lot of different areas in the salaries range. Reach out to me or Chris, and we'll give you we'll give you a number.
Yeah. I'll sort of say I'll kind of breeze through these fairly quickly, but I think Harman, you've touched on there. We're trying to generalize people into blocks here. There'll be people that are maybe in between grades and it's really hard to push on where they are, or some people that maybe haven't got qualifications but they've been in the industry a long time, and you'd say that probably warrants an increased salary even if they've not had those. They might not be JIB qualified, but they might be a manager still. So it's, I'd like to say, advice is if you're not sure, please reach out to us. Same if you're a hiring manager. If you've got salary reviews upcoming, and you want to, you're not sure what to give your staff, like we'll happily give you an answer. We're not going to deliberately make it lower so that all your staff are unhappy. Like we'll give you an honest answer because that's kind of what we offer. Really, it's not just filling jobs; it's trying to help with staff retention as well. Cool. I think we're pretty much there in terms of the actual presentation. We'll go into some questions. I think the only sort of question that came is, one of the newest questions we had was that someone hadn't seen the CII before. I think it is it's not taken as often as the CPI. I think the CPI is one that most people know. I think we mentioned before, it's effectively the same exam or very, very similar. I can't say with absolute certainty because I've not seen any of the exams myself. I've not actually done it. So yeah, it's a different exam board effectively. But yeah, there's a few of the questions we've had sent over to us. One that was sent over his job market for overseas candidates, which I'll answer because the last year helped a few people from overseas make the move to the UK, an individual from Australia, an individual from South Africa, and someone from India as well. All three of them are getting on really, really well. And what is the job market out there for overseas candidates? I think it's decent. I think it's getting better and better year by year. I think there's still a bit of uncertainty for some clients, if I'm being honest, in terms of how transferable certain skills are from different nations. I think particularly Commonwealth nations are the most obvious, where the insolvency law is fairly similar. It's all similar to the UK stuff, but there's definitely a market there. I think it really depends on your experience. I think having qualifications unfortunately becomes way more important, and having really, really strong experience, the bar does become higher, especially if you're requiring sponsorship. If you don't require sponsorship and you've got either a visa or you've got a British passport, that makes your life a hell of a lot easier. Just had a new question come through here. Someone asking, can we share the slides afterwards? Yes, we can. Definitely, it's not a problem at all. This is all being recorded, so there'll be a link that will come out, and you better watch the whole thing. Anything you can fast forward, you also can fast forward through bits that you're not that bothered about hearing about. Another bit we've had asked, we kind of touched upon it, but it was around flexible work contracts and openness to this in the market. Harman, do you want to sort of go on to that bit?
I think we've kind of already answered that question, to be fair. I think it's common now to have flexible working on offer. I guess you've got to split that up. So hybrid working, working some days in the office. Most people are in 2 to 3 days a week. And obviously there's people that lie either end of that in terms of the extremes, but they're rare. So either fully remote work. So probably have about 10 or so clients that offer fully remote work. So you could be based anywhere in the UK and work there. And then probably maybe a similar number of clients that are asking people in 5 days a week. And that's off a list of quite a few clients. In terms of flexible working, in terms of hours you do, it really depends. It's a bit hit and miss, I think. So some firms will want you to stick to the hours that they have. I think quite a few firms are kind of waking up to the fact that, you don't have to start at a certain time and finish at a certain time. As long as you're contactable during sort of core hours, then it's okay. I think I get asked this question quite a bit from candidates that are coming back from maternity leave or candidates that have families. So yeah, it's definitely something that candidates are asking more and more, and fair enough as well, to be fair, because it is on offer out there. So yeah, whoever's asking that question, you should know that it's the market is buoyant, and there's plenty of options out there for you if you want flexible working.
Sure. Another one we've had is around GIAB exams. Someone's gone, what is the best entry point to start training for them? That's a hard question to answer because it depends very much on every individual is different. The exams are expensive and they're hard to do. The pass rate is not very high. I think we've touched upon appraisals. I think the best advice there is if that's something you want to do, I think you need to be very upfront with your employer and say that's something you want to do. And if they feel that you're not ready on it, then you probably want to know why. And if there's bits you need to improve on, find out what they are sooner rather than later. But we've heard of people that have sat them very, very early in their career. Maybe they've only been doing insolvency for 4 years and they've sat them and passed them. Some people do it after 10 years. I don't think there's really a right time. I think also you've got to factor in your own life situation. There's a lot of time you've got to dedicate to doing those exams, and to have a chance to succeed in passing them. You've got to spend a lot of time studying. There's an argument of maybe you do that, once you've had children, maybe they've got a bit older, or maybe you do it before you have a family. I've not got kids, so I wouldn't know. So I'm really finger in the wind there in terms of which is better. It's personal preference, I'd say. But I don't think there's ever like a bad time to do it or a bad way of doing it. I think it's just when you feel ready to give it a go, then give it a go. And again, same with CPI. Don't be disheartened if you fail the first time around. Don't feel like you need to sit both exams in the same sitting. If you want to break it up and do it over the course of 2 years and do personal first and corporate afterwards, I think that's pretty common for people to do that. You've got a better chance of actually passing it that way as well, rather than try to do both of them, fail both of them, then have to do both again the next year. It's still taking you 2 years effectively. Probably been more stressful to do it that way. One we've got as well that was sent before actually is how do I avoid my current employer from finding out that I'm looking for a new job? Harman, do you want to do that one?
Yeah, I get asked that by quite a few candidates actually. It's usually candidates that haven't made a move before, or candidates that aren't they don't really get how the recruitment process works. It's a valid reason. If I was looking, I wouldn't want Chris to know. So it's just awkward, especially if you like your team and you like your boss, which I'm pretty sure most people do. So there's a couple of ways you can go about it, but I think the key things that I would say it's important to stress would be very, very careful with who you tell. So obviously, as recruiters, we have a duty of care to you for 100% confidentiality. We would never know. We would never let know your boss, or we would never let anyone else know that that you work with, that we may know, that you're looking. It's always 100% confidential until you tell us otherwise. But I'd be careful with who you tell within the office. So if you kind of tell a few people, that word kind of spreads around the industry as well. It's quite a tight knit industry, and everyone kind of knows everyone. So you want to be careful with who you tell. But I'd say with regards to actually searching for a job and how you stay under the radar, so to speak, during that process, be very, very careful with the way you deal with recruiters. So I think if you are having conversations sort of simultaneously with 4 or 5 different recruiters, even more than 1 or 2 recruiters at the same time, you're only really increasing your risks that one of those recruiters is going to let something slip. And it's something that we're extremely tight on here. It's probably one of the most important things that I take into account when I'm speaking with a candidate is confidentiality. Because I think there are GDPR regulations out there that sort of state that you're not allowed to share information or sort of pass on personal details without permission, and we will only ever send your CV once we've got some written permission from you. But I'm not here to cast shade on other agencies, but I am well aware of the fact that there are other agencies out there that, because GDPR isn't really that regulated at all, there's no one really to call you out on it apart from maybe your clients and candidates. They will just do it, and they'll just sort of send it out to the entire client list, and they'll be quite loose-lipped when it comes to who's looking. So I'll just be careful with that. But generally, if you want to be really, really discreet, what we can do is sort of put a list of options in front of you. Maybe you choose 2 or 3 that you're really, really keen on. And we'll know the partners for these teams. So we would have met them. So we can just call them up or meet them and sort of say, okay, we've got someone with X number of years experience. This is the salary they're looking for. This is how many days they want to be in the office. This is the kind of work they want to do. What are your thoughts on them? Could you accommodate someone like that in your team at the moment? If it's a no, then that's fine. They're none the wiser. If it's a yes, then we'll say, okay, that's great. And then we come back to you. We let you know that they're interested. And then we can go back to them with like a basically a profile with your details on there. But before that, we can just anonymize everything and keep it sort of under wraps. So I think that's the best way to really answer that, unless you've got anything else to add, Chris.
No, nothing else from me. I think we'll get through 2 more because I'm conscious that people have probably factored in an hour in their diary, and we'll be jabbering on forever otherwise. So I've got a couple more. So one is what's the best way to hand in your notice? So we had this one submitted as well beforehand. Maybe this person's already done it or they're planning to do it. Best way to hand your notice is to be upfront. I think there's no easy way of doing it. Unfortunately, it's generally not a particularly pleasant conversation. It doesn't have to be unpleasant. If you're genuinely moving because you just want to move on to something bigger and better, and hopefully your employer understands that and is happy for you, I think that's the ideal scenario. I think the only way you can actually have that scenario is if you are actually honest about the reasons why you're leaving. If it genuinely is because you just found something that you think is a really good opportunity, it gives you, more interesting work maybe, or you're wanting to relocate to work in a different area of the country and they don't have an office there, I think that's perfectly fine. If it is on a few different things that maybe are a bit close to the bone, maybe it's because you passed me over for a promotion and you didn't give me a salary increase, that's fine to say those things. I think the one thing to obviously be aware of is if you tell them that, then you're kind of giving them every opportunity to make you a counter offer. and you should always be wary of anyone that, for one, a week ago couldn't give you a salary increase, and then as soon as you put your notice in, lo and behold, $5,000 just appeared out of nowhere. Far more cost-effective way of keeping staff, rather than recruiting someone new, is just give the person that's leaving an extra couple of grand, or to just give them a promotion. And again, is that the way you want to get promoted? Really, is by forcing it. You probably want to feel like it's actually been earned and given, rather than you've stamped your feet and kind of decide to leave and then it comes through. And again, it doesn't leave you in a great position sort of long term to do that. And obviously, in terms of leaving, entertaining a counter offer and almost waiting for a counter offer to then ultimately turn it down, because realistically, you've already made your mind up. That's a way to really upset somebody, is kind of giving them false hope that actually you may well be, you may be interested in staying when you're really not. So I think when you're handing your notice in, having in mind that you've actually made your decision, if you actually have made your decision, you're comfortable with what you want to do next, it's fine to actually say, if they ask you, is there anything we can do to keep you, to say no. And actually, you know what, I don't want to get into a bidding war or into an awkward conversation where you're trying to keep me and I've actually already made my mind up. It is okay just to say, I'm fine, I'm happy to end it on good terms there. There's nothing personal, and leave. People leave their jobs all the time. I think anyone that takes it personally, it says it's probably more about them than it does the person that leaves, realistically. I've got one more. I'll answer this one as well, because it's something that I get asked as well quite a bit. It's how our bonus is allocated with our clients. It's hard to give a concrete answer because it varies firm by firm, and it's also an area that is probably most guarded, that in terms of when we're asking clients about how they operate. Most places aren't going to give us a full breakdown of those bonuses and how it's structured, but I guess to keep it simple, most will do some form of company bonus based on how well the team has done, and they'll also do an individual bonus based on how well that individual person has actually got on. So they might have a grading system, and the top performers will get a slightly bigger percentage of that pie, that bonus pool that's there to be taken from. And that's generally how most places will do it. If you're part of a bigger firm, where maybe it's not just insolvency practice, they might have other departments as well. There might be a separate pool that's actually allocated just for the entire company's bonuses, and then there's maybe a separate one for your team as well. But it can vary. I think the best way to actually find out about bonuses and how it works is to ask someone in an interview. I think that's a fair question to ask. Again, they're probably not going to give you every nitty-gritty detail, but they'll give you an overview, and they'll give you a bit of an explanation as to, especially if you've got your own scheme, you can even give it a bit of an overview about how yours works, how does it compare, and that's probably the best way of doing it. I think that's almost an hour on the dot. I think we'll finish things there. Thanks everyone for joining. I think we've said it already, but if anybody has any questions that they didn't feel comfortable putting in here, or you watch the recording and you want to ask us a question, then feel free to give us a shout. Or if you've got questions about salaries, then please do drop us a message or give us a call. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.